Okay, hi Year 8. So you can see now that we've done our background and I'm looking now to start painting in my Twix. So I'm going to stick with the colours that are on here. I'm just going to run you through some principles of colour mixing. So you can see that I've got my palette here and I've only got a small amount of paint on it. You don't need a lot at all. The paint goes quite far, and you can see that I've got my 3 primaries and some white. And now what you want to do when you're doing your colour mixing is you need a brush. Now this work that we're going to be doing is really detailed work. So I'm mixing with quite a big brush. You can see that there, but actually the brushes that I've got to paint with are really small tips. And that's so that I can get into some of these smaller areas. And what we're going to do is we're going to build this up, starting with our lightest background colour and then getting gradually darker. So my background colour is this kind of peachy sort of colour here. So I'm going to start off with some white. I'm just going to move it over into the corner of my palette, like so. I want to make sure that I've got enough to cover all so I don't have to mix any more. So I don't want to mix too small an amount, and I also don't want to mix masses and masses. Now the pigments in these colours are very strong, so you need the tiniest amount. So I'm just going to pick up the smallest bit of yellow on the end of my brush and I'm going to mix that into the white. Now it's really easy to add a little bit more pigment if you look at it and you think that's just not dark enough, but it's impossible to take it out. And adding in more white doesn't always work, okay? So I'm looking at this colour and I'm thinking it's too pink. I need that to be a little bit more orangey, a little bit more peachy. So I'm going to just lift up a tiny little bit more yellow. I don't want to go too mad because it's already getting quite dark. I'm going to mix that up, mix that in, and I can see now that I'm getting that more sort of peachy sort of colour. Twisting my brush to encourage the paint off of the bristles, like so. And I can hold that up against my piece of paper, and actually that's not a bad match at all. So I think I'd be quite happy just to stick with that to start my first coat. So scraping off as much as I can off of this big brush that I've been using, and then have my drawing in front of me, and I'm basically just painting in those lighter areas, and I've already mapped it out, and I've mapped out these lighter and darker areas. It is a very detailed drawing and it would be really easy to get quite lost with this. So don't worry if it's not exactly the same, okay? We're looking to get roughly things, the colours in the right place, but it doesn't matter if it's not absolutely perfect. So when you're painting, you want to pick up some paint. The most control you'll get is if you hold your fingers on the top of this metal bit of the brush here. A lot of people are tempted to hold them up here. I think that's a kind of stereotypical image that you have in your mind of how a painter paints, but actually you'll get more control if you hold it at the top of the metal bit. You want a decent amount of paint on your bristles, but you don't want to overload it. If you overload it, then the paint starts creeping up onto this metal, and then your fingers get dirty, and then you stand more risk of smudging onto your painting. So just a little bit of paint onto the tip, give it a twist. That will twist the end of your bristles and give you a nice point, and then you're ready to go. So remember don't go up to the edge of the line that you want to paint to. Bring your bristles out a bit further, and then as you apply the pressure, let those bristles spread to the edge of where you want it to go, or the line that you want to paint up towards. Now obviously it's very difficult to get long, smooth, straight strokes because you're painting into such a small area in some instances. So you do need to use shorter brush strokes. If it doesn't look like it's covering particularly well, just take your time, paint it in, let it dry off a little bit, it won't take long. And then you can just go over the top of it, just add in another layer, get a nice nice flat colour. And you can see now how I'm starting to apply that colour, and it's covering quite nicely. Just go over those bits that don't look like they've covered very well. So those are the key things that you need to remember when you're doing your painting. Use your photograph as a reference. Keep looking back at it to make sure that you're putting the right colours in the right places as much as possible. Remember, don't get too hung up on it, and if you do put some colour where it's not supposed to be, it's okay. You know, a few mistakes here and there is not going to matter too much. Okay, so I'm just going to paint the rest of this. I'll obviously do this on high speed for you guys, and then you can start to see how the painting comes together. So things to remember: background colour first, lightest background colour first. Don't take your brush up to the edge unless you're working in a really small space like I am at the moment, and then try and get that colour nice and flat. Okay, so that's the first layer of colour in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this colour for the base to make my next colour. So I've got 3 colours on here. There's actually a couple more tones, but I'm just going to look for 3. So this lightest one, this orangey one, and then this quite sort of dark maroony red one. Now I'm going to save some of what I've got here, because I'm going to need to go back and do some touch-ups afterwards. There's certain areas that will need a little bit of touching up, and like down the bottom here, I'm going to paint this colour in solid, and then I'm going to go back with my brush and just add in some of these lighter tones. So I'm going to need to save some of that. So what I'm going to do is, using this part here, I'm going to just lift that up, move that over. I'm not going to need much of it because this is actually quite a bright, solid colour. I'm just going to pick up a bit of my red and yellow, just start mixing those together, until I start to get close to that orangey colour. And I don't want to go too dark because I've got another layer of colour to go in. Now it's quite hot in this room today and my paint's drying out slightly, so you don't normally need to use much water with acrylics, but because it is drying out, I'm just going to dip my brush in my water pot and just add a little bit of water into that just to loosen it up a little bit, make it a bit easier to paint with. And then hold it up. It could probably be just a tiny bit redder, I think. Let's just pop a bit more red in. Hold it back up again. Yeah, that looks pretty good actually. Let's get a bit more water in there because it's very warm in here today. Right, so just like I did before, so twisting my brush and scrape it off on the side, try and get as much of the paint off of this brush as I can. I've rinsed off the last brush that I was using, and now I'm going in again with my next darkest tone. Okay, so that's the next darkest colour, and I'm going to do what I did before. So I'm going to reserve some of this paint here for when I need to go back and I need to do my touch-ups, and I'm going to use this here to mix that very darkest red that you can see here. So I'll just go back and pick up my brush that I used before, give it a quick rinse, pick up some red, and then mix it into this. Now I think what I'm going to have to do is get a little bit of blue in here. So if I hold this up to that red there, you should be able to see that that's quite a bit brighter. So if I just pick up a little bit of blue and just swirl that in, you can see I only used a really small amount, but it's had quite a big impact and it's made that quite a lot darker. Trying not to cover my top in paint. Add a bit more in there. And then hold that up again, and that now looks like the perfect colour. So I don't need as much of this as I did my other colours. So I think what I've got on there is probably going to be enough. And then I can start getting those last colours done. Okay, so you should be able to see now that we've got the 3 tones in there, light, mid and darkest one, and I've used this to help me, and you should also be able to see that it doesn't matter that I haven't got in every single tiny piece of detail. It still works, you can still understand what the image is and what how it's been sort of colour separated. I've just noticed a few bits that I need to just touch up with the white, and then it will be done.